Well, my name is Tim Ginsky, and this is Olympic interview number 3 with my guest today, JR DeSouza. And JR and I have known each other for a short period of time. We're doing this interview basically in the Los Angeles area. Both of us are residents of the greater LA area. It's November 12th, 2024, and this interview will be uploaded onto YouTube under Ourlympics, my brand, before December 1 at some point. And we'll have some links in there to JR's company, which he founded about 15 years ago, Outtex, and anything else that might be one of your passions, JR. You get a chance to plug that at the end of the interview. But first things first, we want to talk about your biography, your background as an Olympic athlete, as a swimmer, and JR DeSouza's story starts in Sao Paulo in 1971. And as I was telling you, JR, I'm 10 years older than you, and all I remember of Brazil in the 70s, all that we knew about, I remember the Bossa Nova and Brazilian soccer, Pele, and that's about all we knew. We know a lot more about Brazil, but I'm going to ask you in a minute to talk a little bit about your country of origin. You've been in the States for quite a few years, and we'll talk about the whole story. But JR basically was into swimming at a very early age, and I'll let you talk about that in a few minutes. But you had some natural aptitude and began to really kind of elevate yourself within your region and ultimately within your country as you got into your teens. You moved to the United States in high school and ultimately went to college there. But JR did swim for his country, for Brazil, in the 1992 Olympics, where you finished 6th in the 4x100 freestyle relay, the men's relay, and 12th in the 100 butterfly. And then you went on in 1993 with your teammates, your Brazilian teammates, to set a world record twice in the 4x100 freestyle relay. And you guys also had a very good performance. You went to the NC2As in 92, 93 in that academic year. And you got 3rd place. You won a gold medal in the SEC championship, but you got third in the NC2As.
Yeah, behind the Olympic champion and Olympic record holder and the American record holder. So it was tough competition. So I'm very proud of that 3rd place at NCAs.
It's a tough deal. Almost if you can place at NC2As, you're a global swimmer by default.
It's definitely a global event. It's one of the toughest meets for swimming for sure in the world. So yeah.
Well, lastly, JR has been the national champion of his native country, Brazil, in several different events: the 50 and the 100-meter freestyles, the 100 and the 200-meter butterfly, and the 200 IM. You have been the best in your country, the top of the heap in each of those events at one point or another before you hung it up. And so we're going to talk about growing up in Brazil and moving to the States. We're going to talk after you retired from swimming about things like how you met your wife, and you ultimately started a company in California where you went to college and swam, which was the University of Tennessee. So just backing up to the beginning, let's talk a little bit about your homeland, about Brazil, because we assume most of our viewers are American. We assume that they know some things, but talk about Brazil, kind of broad brushstrokes. It's a big country. It's populous.
Yeah, no, Brazil is a very big country. As I mentioned earlier, the size of Brazil is the same as the United States if you took out Alaska, which in itself is a very large state. So it's a very large populous country, 250 million, I think, or thereabouts. I was born in a big city of Sao Paulo. I think they're up to close to 20 plus million people that live in the big city. It's kind of a hybrid between New York and LA, in that it's skyscrapers as far as the eye can see. And I was fortunate enough that, my parents had access to swimming pools when I was a little kid, and they used to put me down, and I used to throw myself into the pool. And at the same time, I had bronchitis and I had some difficulties breathing from time to time. And one of the doctors told my parents that they should consider putting me into swimming because it would be helpful for my respiratory, evolution. And they thought, well, that he loves swimming and it may save his life as well. So that's a good idea. And my mom always told me the story that you had to be 7 to enroll in our swim club's swimming program. And I was only 6.5. So she stood in line all night. She was like first in line. And she told the instructor, all my information. And the instructor said, well, unfortunately, he's too young. He's only 6.5. And she begged him. She basically said, listen, the doctor said it's good for him. He throws himself in the pool. It's going to save his life. He really wants to do it, really pleaded with this person. And they said, all right, listen, we have sharks and minnows. If he can get into the minnows, if he can pass the test tomorrow, we'll see what we can do. He was basically trying to get rid of her. It's like, okay. So I came the next day, did the test, and actually became a shark. So, I was very much into swimming as a young kid. I grew up surfing and swimming, and at a pretty early age, showed some aptitude. I began with regional kind of, championships and things of that nature, then became a state champion in the state of Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo and Rio are by far the largest cities and states in Brazil. And so, I showed some aptitude and began to develop, moved into sort of a pre-national position within the country, and started to have Olympic aspirations, even as a kid. I think every young athlete's aspiration, if they really are into their sport, is going to the Olympics. And so that begun to appear in my radar. And it was something that I started dreaming about as a kid. And as I got into my teenage years, I started to realize that a lot of the elite athletes were, particularly in swimming, were going to the United States or going abroad to train for a number of reasons. And so I started thinking about it and started talking to my parents. I was very driven, even as a young kid. I remember being a very skinny kid, as training excessively and developing anemia. And my dad used to say, oh, you got to eat, more iron, and you got to eat this and that. And, I never wanted to listen to him. So he went to my swim coach and he told the coach, he said, look, he's anemic, he's not eating enough. He needs to do this. So my coach came and talked to me and said, all right, you need to eat spinach and broccoli and liver and all this stuff. And I ran home that day and I told my dad, I said, Dad, I need to eat spinach and liver. And so I was very motivated by swimming, very driven, even as a young kid. And I wanted to be better, and I wanted to compete at a national and international level. And so we started to look into the United States as a place to move to train. And the other reason, quite frankly, is that in Brazil, collegiate training is not something that's common. In other words, you kind of have to choose. If you're going to go to college, there's no training. Your schedule, your professors, they're not accommodating at all to outside training. The classes, if they conflict with your training, you're done. You have to make a choice. And the United States is one of the few places, I think, that offer both. And so it was a combination of knowing that some of the best athletes, the best coaches, the best circumstances were here. And I was fortunate enough that both my coach and my parents started contacting a few people. And I ended up going to Florida, and the first year living with a family that also had kids my age who swam. And the original idea was to do an exchange, in essence, a private exchange, where I was going to live with them for a while, and then they wanted to send their son to Brazil as a life experience. But what ended up happening is that once I came, I really didn't want to leave. You know, I adapted pretty well. I wanted to stay. I wanted to go to college. And also, their son wasn't doing so great in school. And so the parents ended up changing their mind about sending him abroad. So I ended up then moving to a boarding school. This is still in high school. And so I was lucky, really, that I ended up connecting with Greg Troy at Bowles High School, which back then was not really that well known. This was right before Anthony Nesty won the gold in '88 and really put Bowles on the map. But I was fortunate in that I believe Greg Troy is one of the best coaches in the world, or was at the time. And I had a couple of phone calls with him. He had seen me swim at a couple of meets in Florida. So he was also, in essence, interested in having me join the program. And it was a great match. And so I ended up going to school there and went from there.
So let's back up a little bit. So much good stuff you've already covered. Talk about your mom and dad for just a second in terms of, we know, Brazil's a Portuguese, settled by the Portuguese. What is your mom and dad's story? Are they Portuguese? Did they come from someplace else, or do you have ancestors going back in Sao Paulo in Brazil?
Yeah, on my mom's side, I have an Italian background. So grandparents and great grandparents immigrated from Italy. And on my dad's side, it's more Brazilian. It does eventually traces back to Portugal. So DeSouza is a Portuguese name. And so on my dad's side, there are several generations that date back. But yeah, they were both, professionals. My mom was an attorney. My father was a dentist. And so I was fortunate that, within their professions, they were able to afford to provide for me to move to the United States, which with, the currency and all the other differences, it was quite an expense in the beginning. It turned out to be a great investment because I ended up getting scholarships to go to school. And so in the long run, it more than paid for itself. Certainly in my eyes, it paid for itself. But I think even from their perspective, my mom was very reluctant to send me. She was terrified of her, I have a sibling who is several years younger than I. And so she was not too enthusiastic about my leaving home at 15, basically, to go live in a country in which I didn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't know anything about the United States. My dad was a big fan of the US, and so he looked up to the United States for all the reasons that I think most people think of in terms of it being a great country to live in, a symbol of many things for the rest of the world. And so he also knew that it was a good investment going in, and so he supported me and helped my mom let me go, so to speak. But yeah, they were supportive in all of the right ways, and a great support system as well for me, in terms of knowing that I had their love and support and backing, if things went wrong. And so I had the benefits of all of those things going in.
Yeah, a lot of things. All of you had to show kind of some courage and kind of letting go for both your parents. Not many parents have their child go away. It's one thing to be an exchange student for a half a year and come back from someplace, but other than vacations, you basically began a new life in the States. Looking back, you stayed here for the most part. So talk a little bit about coming as a 15-year-old. You said you weren't fluent yet in English when you got here. I want you to name me 3 things that you remember as a kid that struck you as, this is different. This isn't like Brazil. Just, they can be trivial, whatever you remember in your 15-year-old mind. What struck you when you first got here?
You know, my first experience in the United States was coming to Disney World. A year, well, a few years prior, I had come to Disney World with my parents. And so I had been to the United States. And so at least I had a sense of what the country was about, the fact that I was already in Florida and I was moving to Florida. That certainly helped. I did not speak the language. One of the things that I remember was watching TV because I was a sponge. It was a very difficult transition in every sense of the word.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
Language was definitely a challenge. I remember watching the news because the news had the least amount of slang. And I remember in the early days, it was like, good night, blah, 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 blah. And then good evening, and so that's how it really started. That there was almost nothing that I understood, but I had, in essence, the summer to learn enough to enroll in school. And so the language was definitely a challenge. I was made fun of a lot, by my friends and peers and, people around me. Definitely tough. I cried a few times. So, I was definitely thrown into the deep end in that I didn't have any kind of support network, so to speak. I was literally on my own. The other thing that was very difficult was the food, because it's so different, and you're just not used to eating any of the things that a lot of Americans eat. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, all of the things that you are used to eating aren't available or around. And so there's really a big transition to that. But the third thing that I guess I recall is that I really, I embraced the lifestyle, and I wasn't defensive about anything. There were no particular traits about culture or Brazil that I was defensive about. And so I tried to embrace the things that I viewed as positive. And if something was different, but I viewed it as constructive and positive and I liked it, I embraced it. And if there were things that I thought, well, that doesn't make as much sense, or, if there's a food that I liked before and I tried the equivalent here and I liked it better there, I thought, okay, well, I'll stick to that. So, I always I try to embrace the best of what I could find and be very open-minded. And that's a philosophy that I guess I've kept throughout the years. I've tried to always learn from other people's mistakes and, sort of keep my ears open, keep my eyes open, keep my mouth shut until I have something to contribute, but really try to absorb the best of what I can figure out and make it my own and make the most of it.
Yeah. Was there any, with all that adapting and jumping into the deep end, to try and immerse yourself in learning the language, et cetera, do you have one funny story, where with hindsight, something embarrassing, something that sticks out those first 2 years as a young teen?
Well, look, there were plenty of embarrassing things just by using the wrong words, not knowing what words meant, not being able to express myself. I was made fun of by other kids. And so there were plenty of those. In a way that drove me even harder. Because, for example, swimming was a great equalizer. And because I was on the swim team, that was one of the things that could speak for itself. And so as I began to show better and better performance, and I was able to outswim other kids, that brought its own status. And so people started to respect me for what I could do. And I dedicated really myself to studying in I think ways that the average person does not. I have pictures that my family at the time had of me in bed, laying on my stomach with the Norton Anthology and a dictionary open side by side, and I'm asleep in bed, trying to do my homework. And so I watched everything from, MTV to the news, to listening to the daily exchanges in the family. And I had to apply all of that towards my schooling. And by the end of my first year, I started doing great in school. So I had disciplines like algebra, Spanish, which I ended up, I took Spanish in school as an easy class because I already spoke Portuguese and there were a lot of similarities. And so I was better than the average American in learning Spanish. Algebra became one of my easy classes. And then my hard classes were English and US history. Because, I remember, when the teacher would talk about things like Paul Revere and Benjamin Franklin, and I was like, who? And the average kid already had a pretty good understanding of those things. And so it just made me work that much harder. When people laugh at you, you can either recoil or you can go at it twice as hard. And I guess my personality is to go at it twice as hard. And so I've always tried to take adversity and use it to my advantage and use it as leverage to sort of accomplish the goals that I had for myself that much harder.
Yeah. And in many ways it's worked out well. It's served you well. So let's go back to the swimming specifically. You're 15, that's 1986, if I do the math. And in 1988, we had an Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea, and you were only 17 years old, approximately at that point. But from what I know, from our conversations, you had become good enough at that point to go back to Brazil and compete for a spot on that Olympic team. And tell people what happened in terms of the 50 freestyle. This is a great insight about the Olympics and the way things work differently in different countries and things that athletes have to overcome beyond just their sport. So would you share that?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, I left Brazil for a number of reasons. And this is one of those reasons. There was a lot of corruption in sports. There was a lot of corruption in many aspects of life. And sports was no different. And so, for example, Brazil did not have an Olympic trials. The process for qualifying for the Olympics was subjective. As hard as that is to believe, we had no touch pads, for example, at a lot of our swim meets. There were still timers collecting your time. Touch pads were just getting introduced at some of the national meets in Brazil. But we were using, for example, short course touch pads, which are remarkably shorter. And on an Olympic pool, when you put them at block level, they're barely in the water. And so if you touch anywhere in the water, your chances of missing the pad were like 85% plus. And our Olympic qualifying process was, in essence, a choice made by the administrators of the Olympic Brazilian Committee. And by 88, I was good enough that at nationals, we had 2 nationals a year, and that was always the case. We had winter nationals and summer nationals, short course and long course. On Olympic years, it was always long course. And at that summer nationals, I was second in the 100 fly, second in the 200 IM, third in the 100 freestyle. the 50 freestyle was being introduced at the Olympics that year, I won the 50 visibly, which again, with some of the touch pads, there was some, like after everybody finished, they wanted to disqualify me because they were like, who is this kid? And they were going to give me 8th place. There was some, behind the scenes infighting, and I ended up getting the gold. But it wasn't the Olympic qualifying time. So what they would do is they would take the 16th place finish from the previous Olympics, and they made that the qualifying time. And so you had to be either first or second in your event and meet the qualifying time. But if you made the qualifying time in any one particular event, then you could swim other events in which you were first or second. So long story short, there were a lot of shenanigans. And even though I had been, like I said, second in multiple events, third in the 100 free, which would have qualified me for the relay, I won the 50. 3 days later, they did a time trial for another swimmer for the 50 by himself. He had competed against me and gotten 6th, about a half a body length behind me. 3 days later, he did a time trial where they basically fired the gun when he was in the air. And he barely made the qualifying time. They took him. He false started at the prelims and didn't even swim the prelims. And so that in itself was very motivating for me, because it sort of lit another flame in my desire to, show them, if you will, that, I was going to leave no doubt that come the next Olympics, that I deserved to go and to participate. But yeah, so, it was part of the journey that left a very, very bitter taste in my mouth in many ways. I have a lot of things to be thankful for Brazil, but I also have some scars along the way, and that was one of them. The good side, and we'll talk about, my Olympic journey in a second, but the other good side, I think, of this whole thing is that because of athletes like me, the sport progressed a great deal. And today, Brazilian swimming is in a better place because they have had to go through this journey where they've, taken a lot of that corruption out. They've added a lot of transparency. And so I'm at the same time proud to have been part of the solution. And I have a lot of friends who are coaches and administrators now. And I have friends who have kids now who are competing at the Olympic level. And so it always makes me feel good that at least that pain and suffering yielded in some good outcomes.
Yeah. And of course, every Olympic athlete, if you were good enough to get there and you went through years of training and racing, nobody gets there in, a couple years. Everybody has some form of disappointment or something that isn't fair as part of your story. And that's I wanted people to hear. That's part of your journey. 17 years old, it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair at all. It was blatantly unfair, and you had to keep going. And ultimately, the sport has reformed itself, and you can feel like you contributed to that, one of many people. So
yeah, because I have no illusion that I would have, qualified for finals or been a contender at 17. But I do believe it would have made me, in some ways, a better 92 Olympian.
Yeah.
Had I had that experience, it would have demystified and, removed other aspects. Now, again, would my fire burnt so bright had I gone? Or maybe not. But I, it is certainly part of the story.
Yeah, and I think who knows, right? Talk about motivation and fuel for the fire. I'll show those people, the whole idea of payback or getting even, whatever. But I think you bring up a good point too, because I've written a lot of stories about Olympic athletes, and I've talked to people like yourself. And until you can do all the training in the world, and when you're actually on that Olympic stage, it is really overwhelming for some
It's unique.
people.
It's unique. Yeah, people ask me all the time, about the Olympic experience. And what I always tell them is that on one hand, it's a process. As you just said, you don't wake up there one day. You go to regionals and state and nationals and international competition. In my case, South American championships, United States competition, Pan American and international events. I had gone to the World Championship in Perth, Australia in '91. And so these were all steps towards building the know-how and the preparation that are part of being at the Olympics. And so on one hand, you have all of those things. On the other hand, the Olympics is really unique. And you see that in many events, not just in swimming. The winning times aren't always necessarily the athlete's best performances, because there are so many other pressures and so many other factors that are going into play. But that's part of what makes it so special, right?
Yeah.
And that's an experience that few people get to have. And so all of those things combined make for a very unique, unforgettable experience.
Yeah, win, lose, or draw. I just was focusing on a track athlete, and she washed out, unfortunately, in the heptathlon. Stuff happened, and all that preparation, etc. She could have just kind of sat in that, stayed there. That's really disappointing beyond what most of us could comprehend. But she told herself what you just said, which is so few people get a chance to get there and fail. You're in a small minority, and in a sense, and she picked herself up and actually, completed her event, in part because a lot of other people were counting on her and cheering for her, and she did it for other people as well as herself. You have your folks and a whole host of people that were cheering for you in '92. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I wanted you to just briefly touch on University of Tennessee, because that was the next piece after '88, going on to college, and talk briefly about your first impressions. You're in the South, you're going to a big state school, Tennessee, you're a Brazilian kid, you've had time to adjust to the States, but what do you remember from UT? I think you really were happy you went there.
Very much so. When I was a senior in high school, again, I lived with a family for 1 year out of the 3 that I was there for high school. So my last 2 years, I was living on my own at Bowles. And Greg Troy, who was kind of a father figure to me in many ways, helped me in a number of ways. But as you can imagine, I didn't really have parental guidance. My parents didn't know how to advise me as to what to do as it pertains to going to college, because they didn't know. And frankly, in a nutshell, there were really only 2 schools that I knew: Harvard and Stanford. Because I heard of them, and like even before living in the United States, you hear about those schools. And I knew that Harvard didn't really give out scholarships, so I wasn't really that interested. And Stanford was already self-recruiting in a way. I mean, they attracted already the best athletes in every event. I graduated high school at a young age. I wasn't even, I think, 17. I think I just turned 17 that summer that I graduated. I weighed 155 pounds, I think, at the time. So I was very skinny. And everything else to me was sort of the same. I didn't know the difference between Florida, Michigan, Berkeley, Tennessee. You know, it was kind of all sort of the same. And I was fortunate to go on several recruiting trips. And I had a fantastic, set of trips to a number of different schools. I think I could have done well and would have enjoyed a number of different schools. But I particularly enjoyed my visit at the University of Tennessee. John Tremblay, who was the head coach at the time, did a great job, influencing me and recruiting me. And then I also got accepted to the College Scholars Program at the University of Tennessee. I was the first ever student athlete accepted into that program. We were talking earlier about sort of my dedication and my focus. And by the time I graduated high school, I was in the top 5% of my class. I was a pretty good student, straight A's, good scores on the aptitude tests and stuff like that. So, I had a number of schools getting after me. I even got accepted into Stanford and Berkeley and schools like that. But I wanted to go somewhere where I, had a good scholarship, where I felt good about the program, both swimming wise and academically. And the University of Tennessee seemed to make a lot of sense. And so I chose to go there. I had a very good, tenure at the school. We were an up and coming program. We had, I think we were in the top 5 at NCAs all of the years that I was there. And we had some very good athletes, not only in swimming. I think in swimming alone, we had something like 7 or 8 swimmers who qualified for 92 for a number of different countries. We had a couple of Americans, Puerto Rico, Hungary, Brazil, Canada. So we had a very competitive program, which helped me a great deal in terms of preparing. And then again, academically, I was able to design my own curriculum, make lots of great friends, and build a lot of positive memories.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It worked out. I'm beginning to believe it works out because your attitude makes it work out wherever you land. You turn lemons into lemonade. So let's move on to Barcelona. What was different with your Olympic qualifying for 92, where you didn't get the wrong end of the stick? It worked out. Talk about that briefly, and then let's jump into your reflections on Barcelona when you got there.
Yeah, I was growing in every sense of the word dramatically, throughout my college years. So, I think I put on 15 pounds, in those 4 years between the 88 and 92 Olympics. So I was developing in every in every sense of the word. My swimming was evolving. I was winning at nationals in multiple events, as you mentioned. I was coming back from nationals with, sometimes 4 or 5 gold medals plus relays. And so I had established myself as one of the top swimmers in Brazil. And we did have Olympic trials, which was nationals. And leading into the games at the SEC championship, I had already broken the national record for Brazil in the 100 fly. I had already qualified with the Olympic qualifying time at SECs. And so leading into nationals, I was already favored in a number of events, and I ended up qualifying for the Olympics in the 200 IM, the 100 butterfly, the 100 free for the relay, and the 200 free for the relay. And so, it was a much smoother process. I was able to sort of, not worry too much going into it because I already felt like I was favored. I already had the qualifying time. So it was, in a sense, a defensive participation in nationals, just making sure that nobody, beat me or that there were no surprises there. And fortunately, there weren't. And so, it worked out. At the Olympics, as I mentioned earlier, it was a surreal experience. Unfortunately, I chose not to go to the opening ceremonies because I swam day one. Swimming is day 1 through 7. And going to the opening ceremonies is a very strenuous day. You have to, in essence, get up early, be in line, stand on your feet for hours on end, then get in line again to get back to the dorm. So you've kind of been on your feet for half the day. And when you're serious about competing, like I was, and you want to do your best, I chose not to go to the opening ceremony so that I could be rested for day 1, which was the 100 butterfly. And I qualified. So back then, there was only prelims and finals. And finals was divided into the A and B finals. So the A final was the top 8, and then the B finals was the 8th or 9th through 16th. So you couldn't move up, even if you won, even if your time in the B finals was faster than the gold medalist, which has happened, by the way. You still don't get the gold medal, but in essence, you get to compete for the top 16 places. So I qualified 16th in the 100 fly. So I was in lane 8 going into the finals. And then I moved up in the finals into 12th place. So, I felt good about that. I'm not going to lie, I wanted to qualify for finals. And so in a way, when I touched the wall, I went my best time. So I was happy about that. But I had a feeling that may not be good enough to qualify for the finals. And so a couple of heats later, when I saw that I was 16th, I was both disappointed that I didn't make the top 8, but happy that I squeezed into the top 16. So I had an opportunity to swim again. And so then, my focus switched into wanting to do the best that I could that evening. I moved up. And so, I was pretty happy about that. And then a few days later, we were 6th in the relay. And so I was also pretty happy about that because, again, we didn't think that we necessarily had a chance to medal. I mean, we aspired for a medal, but we knew that it was an outside shot. And so, 6 was kind of within the realm of our expectations. We broke our own national record. I led off with my own personal best time as the leadoff swimmer in the second fastest time in the country. Our anchor won the silver medal in 92 in the 100 freestyle. And so, overall, I had a very positive Olympic experience. I wanted to do more, but at the same time, it was hard for me to be too hard on myself, knowing that I had performed better in almost every event in which I participated.
Yeah, what else can you do? Again, I've heard athletes talk about it's effort. You can't control outcome, but you can say, I gave it an A effort. I swam the best race I could. I feel good about that. And I made the Olympics, and millions of the rest of us didn't. So
I will tell you, people talk about the post-Olympic depression, and I'm here to tell you that it's a very real thing. I think it affects every Olympic athlete differently because everyone's experience is different, everyone's expectation is different, and everybody's circumstances are different. For me, I still had my senior year in college left, but the Olympics are in August for practical purposes, and training began shortly thereafter. And so after the Olympics, it's hard to describe it, but in a sense, you have trained in every aspect of your being, right? Because it's not just the swimming, it's the going to school and eating and resting and not doing certain things and making certain choices, all of those are interconnected. When
I
you
lost
wake-
your audio.
Oh, am I back?
Now you're back.
Sorry about that. So all of those things have an impact. And so when you wake up the week after the Olympic Games is over, it really forces you to look back and to think about all of those choices in a way that you had never thought before, because you're just thinking about performing and you're just thinking about the end goal. Sorry, let me turn this off real quick because it keeps connecting. Sorry about that. It really forces you to look at things in a different, because you've never had to look at things the way that you are looking at them now in retrospect or in hindsight. And so it just, it's a philosophical time of your life where you're resetting expectations, you're thinking about what next, and you're recalibrating different parts of your life and trying to figure out, what kind of person you're going to be now, and who you are, and how much of your life is going to be defined by what you've already done versus what you may do next. And so again, life, I think, is what you make of it. And I think I was partially lucky that I still had my senior year. So it helped me get back into the groove of things. I got back into school. I eventually got back into training. At first, I was not as motivated. It took me a while to get back into the groove of training. But then I got all of that back. I got the hunger back. I started to think about what other objectives do I have. I started thinking about graduation. I started thinking about the World Championships. And luckily for me, about a year later, and after I graduated, I had an opportunity to go again to the World Championship. And at Nationals, which was the trials for that championship, I had again, won multiple events. I think the 100 and 200 fly, come in like third in the 100 free, third in the 200 free, won the 200 IM, broken a few national records. One of my colleagues, my teammates, did the math and figured that our combined times for the top 4 finishers in the 100 freestyle would have been within like a couple of tenths of the world record. So he convinced us to stay after Nationals and do a time trial. And so we did that. We did a time trial the day after, swimming by ourselves, and we broke the world record by 3/100ths of a second. And that also gave us motivation for the next 6 months of training as we prepared for the World Championship. And it helped, give me motivation leading up to that meet in Palma de Mallorca.
Wow. A lot of things again came together with that friend doing the math and figuring that out. That could have easily not happened. Yeah. And you could have all gone on your own separate ways, none the wiser, but you set that world record twice. And you said you swapped out 2 of the guys the second time?
No. So what happened was, from the Olympics, we had 2 swimmers retire, so to speak. So we had 2 younger swimmers who are now part of that 4x1 relay. We broke the world record at this trials by 3/100ths of a second. And so going into the world championship, we were favored. So we swim prelims as favored in lane 4 in the last heat. We did not qualify going into the finals first. I think the US qualified first, Russia was second. I think Sweden or Italy was third. So we were like 4th or 5th going into the final. I think we were in lane 2. We knew that we saved some for the finals. We just wanted to get a lane. And then we won in the finals, and we broke our own world record by over a second. I think it was a second and a half. So that was the second time that we broke the world record. The US got the silver and Russia got the bronze. And then a couple of nights later, we swam with the same team members, minus one, my bad, one different swimmer, and we got the bronze in the 800 freestyle relay.
What a way to go out. Perfect.
Yeah.
And that more or less.
For me, that was perfect because I had, graduated now from college. I had gotten into grad school. And so I had sort of an opportunity to turn the page and go do something different with my life. And I felt like, having broken the world record, gotten a gold and a bronze at the world championship, it was kind of, a great opportunity to transition with no regrets.
Well, let's just talk briefly here. Just a few things, transitioning to how you met your wife and how you transitioned to California and then started Outex, your business. That's what I want to finish with you, just talking about those things. And I think I'll put your details up for the company website, like I said, on the upload. So can you just jump in, JR, with life after swimming?
Yeah, so, my wife and I met at the University of Tennessee, where we both attended. She had a friend, I think, in her sorority that was used to come to a lot of the swim team parties. And she told her, "Oh, you got to go to the swim parties. They're fun." So she came, and we met on the dance floor, and we've been together ever since. I think we met late '91, so right before the Olympics. And we've been together ever since. I went to grad school. I got my MBA with an emphasis in marketing and finance. I was always very much into technology, and so right out of grad school, I got a job with Philips Electronics. They're a Dutch technology company. They had headquarters for North America in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I started working through internships with them, took a full-time position after grad school with them. Shortly after that, we moved to Palo Alto. They offered me a position in Silicon Valley, which I gladly took. My wife and I got married shortly thereafter. We got married in Lake Tahoe. Our daughter was born in Silicon Valley when we were there. I worked in technology for close to a decade, in Silicon Valley. After Philips, I was the original product manager at TiVo, the TV service. So I was the original product manager there, was there pre-IPO, helped launch all of our platforms. And then took a job with Samsung, moved cross country, and that's where my son was born. And then I was recruited by Disney, and that's why I moved to California. So I moved to California and kind of transitioned from pure technology, so to speak, into more of content technology. And so Disney was looking, this was right around the time of Napster, and there was a lot of transition from analog to digital. So the studios and the record labels were all stressing about the whole transition. TiVo was also at that forefront. And so I helped, initiate a lot of their efforts in that space. So it was a brand new experience working in entertainment for me. And at the same time, I had always been passionate about content and photography and videography and cinematography. And I grew up taking lots of pictures, and I inherited that from my dad, who has since passed away. But so my cousin and I came up with this idea, in essence, for a solution to make cameras waterproof. And fast forward a few years, we came up with this idea of Altex, which is in essence a soft housing for cameras that uses cinema grade or optical glass ports instead of acrylic. It maintains all of the functionality, and it's very modular so that you can build support for things like tripod mounts and triggers and tethering. And so it's a fairly simple idea. It applied a lot of what I had already learned from much larger companies in terms of patents and intellectual property. So we got a couple of patents. I started working on the concept nights and weekends. DreamWorks Animation at the time, after Disney, with their full consent, by the way. They knew that I was doing this kind of on the side. And again, long story short, once DreamWorks, when Jeffrey Katzenberg sold the company to Comcast, I was under contract. And so I had a little time left on my contract that it, in essence, gave me the freedom to transition to full-time on Altex. And I've been doing that ever since. So it's been now, probably 8+ years that I've been doing it full-time. We've continued to evolve the concept. We work with a lot of photographers and cinematographers around the world. We have everything from production companies that do shows like Survivor, Netflix documentaries, National Geographic, CBS, all the way to freelancers and enthusiasts and people that just want to, take their camera underwater. So we sort of cater to a very broad spectrum of customers. We've recently launched a phone solution as well. So we have a solution now that works for cell phones and smartphones that people can use. And so we keep broadening the lineup of products, and it has given me an opportunity to combine again my passion for technology and content creation and photography and all that with business and starting a company and being my own boss and influencing others and making an impact, which is something that I really enjoy.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to interview you, J.R. DeSouza. You've lived an accomplished and an interesting life, and you just demonstrated that a lot of this whole journey is about your attitude, what you choose to believe. It's not things that affect us. It's our view of things. It's our view of our circumstances. And you're such a good example of that. You, every step of the way, made a decision to take a positive view, to buckle down, and you rightfully earned a lot of rewards and good things, including your wife and your family above all, beyond the Olympic stuff. So any last words of advice, especially for younger viewers that are listening to this and maybe they're playing sports, maybe they don't want to go to the Olympics, but they're inspired. What would you say to somebody who's 15 and they're playing soccer or they're swimming or in terms of the future and dreaming and expectations?
Well, my only advice is be true to yourself. and believe in yourself. If you have objectives and goals, and be your own motivation, overcome and have a good attitude about things. Because I think what you said is exactly right. I've always been just very driven. I've never been pushed by others. I was lucky in that my parents were supportive, my coaches were supportive, but I think that they saw in me a self-drive and a determination, that they knew that I was true to myself, that I wasn't to be something that I wasn't, and they helped me along the way. And I always try to be positive. In the early 2000s, some laws changed that allowed me to have dual citizenship, because along the way I had gotten my green card, and I've always loved this country, and I'm an American, and I consider myself an American. I have a lot to be thankful and grateful for Brazil, but I have a lot to be grateful for this country, and that's part of the reason that I'm so patriotic. But I do believe that it all comes down to being self-motivated and finding your way and being true to yourself, and trying to be positive, and being positive not only to yourself but to others around you.
Thank you, JR. Thank you for me and on behalf of everybody else that listens to this interview. And this was a lot of fun, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you at the pool.
Great to be with you. I appreciate the time, and happy to answer any other questions that people have. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And as I said, we'll put up links to outtakes in this YouTube interview that'll be uploaded sometime before December 1, 2024. So thank you in advance, everybody that listens to this, and thank you, JR DeSouza.
We'll do some butterfly together at the pool next time I see you. Thanks again, Tim.
Great interview, and I will